at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. And then I have the pleasure of bringing this forward with our Black and Latino men today. So thank you to everyone again for joining us. This is the first of a really dope series called The Green Table Talk. For the theme for today is Legacy of the Earth, Connection to the Land. That is such a powerful statement, and we really hope that today these kings that we have on live with us today will really help to amplify how Black men and Latino men are so crucial and critical to the environment and to the earth. In addition to that, just to give some norms for how this will operate today. So we will be accepting questions. Please feel free to engage with each other online with all of our attendees. We will only be projecting video of our panelists for this afternoon. You can also use the Q&A box as well to ask any questions that you may have. If for some reason we're not able to get to your question during the event, we will have a FAQ that we will send out in a few days post-event. So I did want to give those pieces of guidance before we get started. And the last thing is we will have a poll in the course of the event today, so make sure that you look out for that if you are viewing everything online with us today. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Wes Bellamy just to give some welcoming remarks on behalf of the Black Millennial Political Convention.
Thank you, Tracy. We really appreciate you. My name is Dr. Wes Bellamy. I'm the co-founder of the Black Millennial Political Convention. Very excited to be here, not only with all of our esteemed panelists, but all of our viewers today. We wanted to collaborate to put this together to be able to show not only the power of brothers, both Black and brown from across the country working together, but also to share a little bit about our experience.
We had a little interruption there. All right, Wes, thank you. We had a little interruption there, but as you could hear, Wes sends his welcomes and greetings to everyone who is present. We have, this is a two-part series, so today's focus is on food justice. Dr. Wes Bellamy will also be a part of the conversation taking place on this coming Thursday on the topic of gentrification. So with that, we're going to go ahead and transition to our wonderful moderator for this afternoon, Mr. Lewis Bailey, who goes by Bailey. He is a part of a dynamic organization which has been a pioneer in the environmental justice movement. We Act for Environmental Justice. It is just such an honor to have you here with your wisdom to facilitate this much needed conversation. So I am actually going to hide myself and I'm going to turn it over to this panel of wonderful kings that we have today. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, thank you, Latricia, for that introduction. My name is Lewis Bailey, and I am the National Coalition Manager for the EJ Forum for We Act for Environmental Justice. We Act is a 32-year organization with its main headquarters in Upper Manhattan, New York City, and we also have a DC office that works on federal policy. I want to welcome all those who are on this call and thanking you for taking time out of your day to spend it with us to talk about food justice, which is a topic not only in the individual, but it's around the world. So thank you, everyone, for being on this call. I am going to transition into the introduction of our panelists, and each of our panelists, I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to introduce yourselves. Okay, so we will begin there. So our first panelist, Mr. Brandon Frame, is on the call with us. And Brandon is the founder of the Black Man Can.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the introduction. Really happy to be here and have this very important and powerful conversation. I'm looking forward to sharing some remarks, but also hearing what everyone else has to say. Again, Brandon Frame, founder of The Black Man Can, which is a nonprofit focused on celebrating, educating, inspiring, as well as amplifying and creating the stories of what Black men and boys can do.
Thank you for that, Brandon. We also have on the call Jamal Whitlow, the creative director of Privileged Memphis. He's on the call with us. Jamal, are you there?
Jamal will be in shortly. He's just having a little bit of technical difficulty, so we can move forward with the next panelist. Thank you.
Okay. Our other panelists, we have Cristobal Jimenez on the line with us. And Cristobal, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you. Good afternoon to all. I'm Cristobal Jimenez, Program Director of Corazon, Latino in Puerto Rico. We promote the enjoyment of our natural resources based on stewardship, making sure that we have a good collaboration with I'm translating, with a passion and intensity and education to our communities and country.
Thank you, Cristobal. We also have Pastor Tillman from Flint. Pastor Tillman, the mic is yours.
How you doing, everybody? My name is Ezra Tillman from Flint, Michigan, First Trinity Missionary Baptist Church. We've been working on the grounds in Flint, Michigan to bring about the aware of injustice in so many different areas, and just glad to be part of the conversation today on something that we have been very concerned about and are suffering from at this time.
Thank you very much, Pastor Tillman. We also have Dr. Wes Bellamy. He's having some technical difficulty. He's on the line as well. So we welcome all the gentlemen.
I'm back.
You're back? Okay.
We're here.
Great.
Yeah, as we discussed earlier, I'm Dr. Wes Bellamy, co-founder of the Black Millennial Political Convention. I'm a former city councilman and vice mayor in Charlottesville, Virginia, and the current political science department chairman at Virginia State University. Again, really excited to be here with these esteemed brothers and looking for a robust conversation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bellamy. Did I miss anyone else of our panelists that's on this call? Great. Okay. So our panelists, I am going to frame our conversation going forward. Each of you will have some time to answer. We have 5 questions, and each of you will have a chance to comment and provide feedback. I will not go in any particular order. I will just pick someone at random to speak, and we will go from there, okay? I will start with our first question. And our first question, and I'm just going to start with Mr. Frame. So Mr. Frame, Brandon, here is the first question. Food justice activist Karen Washington wants us to move away from the term food desert and use the terminology food apartheid, which takes into account the systematic racism permeating America's food system. Fresh fruits and vegetables, for example, help absorb lead and heavy metals in the body. However, access to these types of foods are not readily available in Black and Latino communities. So your question is 3 parts. What does food access look like in your city? How has it transitioned over time? And when did you start to notice there was a difference based on location? Mr. Frame, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think those are really interesting things. One, even just to the few, I think there's a space to continue to use both words, food apartheid and food desert. I think there is a space to use both of those titles there. And then to the 3 questions, the 3-part question, I think about two different spaces, because I've lived in New York City now for 2 years. So I've seen differences. Like I live in the South Bronx, and I know there's a distinct difference between like the South Bronx and Williamsburg. There's a distinct difference between, even if I live close enough to Harlem, I can walk to Harlem from my apartment. It takes me 10 minutes to get to Harlem. And like you see things changing. And I know on the 18th, it talks the conversations around gentrification, and you see those two things kind of linked together. This idea of food justice, food apartheid, food deserts, and the lack thereof as communities change. And so I think that's really important to note. And I've seen that in the Bronx. And so like, even in the community that I'm in, it's slowly changing with things that are coming in. But the community is changing as well. Like the South Bronx will be what Williamsburg is in the to Brooklyn, right? And the South Bronx is making changes in that way. And you see the buildings going up. Starbucks is now here, and a host of other things that weren't always there. I will say though, what New York City can offer though is like there are the like fresh fruits and stuff like that. I think is and that's kind of part of the hustle of New York City, and those type of stands. In terms of speaking about it from where I grew up. So I grew up in Hartford, Connecticut. And I wanted to point that out because I remember realizing as I got older that I lived in a food desert. And we can use the word of food apartheid. So I lived in the north end of Hartford, right? And on the north end of Hartford, there is no, and I still think this to the day, there is no full service grocery store, i.e. a Stop and Shop, which is big in Connecticut, a Big Y. There are the smaller ones like a Bravo, which are like the much smaller grocery stores, but there is no full service Stop and Shop, Wegmans, or whatever part of Food Lion, depends on what part of the country you live in, the type of grocery store that would be there. But in the north end of Hartford, there is no, you have to go all the way to Bloomfield, Connecticut. If you live in the north end, you literally have to go to another town to get the food, to go to just a full service grocery store that we may all be used to going to. And that was when as I moved in Connecticut as an adult, I was like, this is not okay. And then I thought back to when I was younger, when we went to the grocery store, we always left Hartford to go to the grocery store until we moved to the suburbs as well. And so that's something that I've noticed and see that that's a problem. Like I think about having worked as an adult, worked in education in Connecticut before I came to New York City, and noticing that, my students, when it came to going to the grocery store, like they either had to go to the south end of Hartford, right? And that was tied to legislation that there's a grocery store on the south end and not the north end of Hartford. And so I see that as a problem that needs to be rectified. And I know that there's many other communities across the country that are dealing with having that full service grocery store, as well as access to various types of foods that are beneficial to raising families.
Thank you so much, Brandon.
I want to jump in if I may, and I'm being joined by my daughter Stokely. But thank you for making your interest known, honey. I think it's important for us to notate, though, a lot of this has a great deal to do with our elected officials. And when I think of the term food apartheid, I actually think I agree with Brother Brandon in regards to there's room for both, but that is appropriate. And I'm glad it's been raised. So I've never thought about it like that. It's systematic, to say the least. Elected officials, policymakers, specifically local electeds, and I know this firsthand, we have a great deal of autonomy when it comes to what kind of businesses we choose to attract. And if we're not advocating in specifically predominantly low-income neighborhoods or neighborhoods in which you have a corner store where kids can go and get hot Cheetos for breakfast every morning, or eat Fritos or eat Funyuns or juices and things of that nature, opposed to actually having a grocery store where people have access to food, local officials could advocate for such. And I think that we have to be steadfast in demanding more from these individuals to do just that. It is apartheid. It's systematic, and it is designed, whether people want to admit it or not, for us to continuously remain in a certain cycle. Again, when you look at tax breaks that municipalities can provide, when you look at different offerings for different people that localities can provide in terms of attracting others, there's more than enough leeway to do so. There is a conscious decision of not to bring these individuals and these particular businesses in. And we have to be very blunt and candid when we decide to call that out. It's not by happenstance that, again, you can have a liquor store, you can have a gun shop, you can have a corner and convenience store all throughout the hood, but you don't have a Wegmans, a Kroger, you can't get a Walmart or things of that nature. I can promise you, it's not just because there's limited space. It's by design. And I'll leave it at that.
And not to, I don't want to have equity.
Okay, hold on 1 second. I just want to hear some other of our panelists before we get Cristobal from Corazon Latinos. I'd like to hear your take on it. And then after that, we'll have Mr. Whitlow, Jamal on the follow-up.
Okay, well, about the 3 questions, when I see food access, well, I live in Puerto Rico, so the first limitation that we have is geography. And like Dr. Bellamy was saying, regulations. Most of our food basket comes from the States, ironically, so it's like 85% of our supplies, they need to be shipped. Now, in addition to be shipped, they're being shipped on 2nd or 3rd quality. So if you want the first quality of that product, maybe I need to go to San Juan to a really specialized grocery store to get that supply as it should be. Has it transitioned over time? Yes, mainly because of guidance, direction, and advocacy. We've been over 18 years lobbying to protect several terrains to be designated as nature reserves. And in that quest, we have always educated our younger generations. And in addition to that, we have promoted how to establish a really solid community. So as such, we have the opportunity to then advocate properly on how we want to have those transitions. The same way that we had a nature reserve now that we can manage, we have had the opportunity of making sure that even in a slow scale, we have some farmers that they have the opportunity of developing their own lands on a more focused or more direct approach to have a strong business that they can sustain, and at the same time that it will end up on my table. So the biggest challenge has been just to keep on that ball rolling, how you identify the community, make sure that you keep educating so that we have the opportunity to make those changes in regulation and that they are focused on keeping our community safe. Like Mr. Frame says, it's been slow, but it's a steady and constant change. And if we keep on moving forward together, making sure that we focus on our beliefs, on what we consider proper, on what we really need on our community so that they could be strong, we're going to make that change. And advocacy, I need to emphasize that we need to make sure that not just work the grassroots, but make sure that we can make that transition so that the country reflects exactly what we want them to reflect. So the difference is based on, the difference in location is definitely felt, but at the same time, I consider that even this panel is a good example of how we can be stronger together, making sure that the focus will be to keep on that snowball growing bigger, and the small change that we have seen reflects on a better tomorrow for our next generations.
Thank you, Cristobal. Jamal, you're up next, and Pastor Tillman, you'll be follow up with the question. So Jamal, the floor is yours.
First, I'd like to say, good afternoon, gentlemen. Apologize for my tardiness on here. I am Jay Whitlow, Creative Director of Privilege. We work, we give, we party. Not to be long-winded, just kind of piggybacking a little bit off to Dr. West. It is important, I think, we pay attention to our elected officials and really address the systematic approach to these food deserts in our communities. Food access in Memphis actually you know, we actually have grassroots people on the ground fighting in our Orange Mound communities. There was a big deal about a Kroger grocery store leaving and wanting Black people to have more options other than just some of the smaller, low quality brand chains that they wanted to bring into the actual community. People still wanted to have the access to the fresh fruits and the fresh vegetables, things of that nature. And it goes back to that point about being intentional about attracting those types of businesses and organizations to our community to really serve our people in the capacity in which they deserve to be served. You know, when did I start to notice the difference? Honestly, you know, I grew up, there's always been a neighborhood grocery store in my neighborhoods. And as an adult, you know, I live in the suburban area, and there's a grocery store every corner. 4 Targets, Walmarts, Kroger's, they're everywhere. But then when we do realize we travel into our low income neighborhoods, those options and those opportunities are far in between. And so it does really, it's really obvious that these neighborhoods aren't equipped with the fresh food and the produce that they require and that they need. So over time, I've just kind of witnessed a transition and kind of see people moving out. So just, again, not to be long, we're just kind of piggybacking off of those things. It's just important. So.
Okay, we're going to transition to Pastor Tillman. Now, Pastor Tillman, I know faith-based groups and churches play a big role in the community in terms of food and handing out food and make sure community members are fed. Can you just give us a glimpse of what does food access look like in Flint? Because I'm really interested in hearing your take on that.
Yes, sir. But thank you so much. Thank you, number one, for setting the stage of what the church actually does, and it pertains to this conversation the Black church does, because in our own community, many people feel as if we don't do anything. So to take on responsibility of how we serve our community, whatever, is very endearing to us, because you can't be part of a community and not and draw from that crowd and not do your part to give to it. For me, being a transplant to Flint, I don't have the privilege to give the markers of time of how it got to this point. But I have to agree with Brandon's perspective of living in the seat and not knowing what's going on, and then being on the other side of the seat. And I think many people who don't live from the place of being deprived and being taken from, you understand the needs and the poverty that you really live in, because all those things were stripped from you and it was systematically done over time. Being in Flint right now, we add right about 100,000 people. It is one store in Flint, Michigan to service the whole city. Every other store that provides any form of quality food is on the outskirts of town or right on the border. Could you imagine what that looks like? So growing up, as Brandon stated, I always saw my dad go to the corner store to get groceries, but when it got to produce, we went all the way to the east side. We got the pretty collard greens, we got the apples and oranges, we got the grapes, we got the nuts, we got everything to stack the house up with. When it pertains to getting meat, we didn't go to the corner store. My dad went to the meat market and he bought the food there. So you didn't realize that in your community or whatever, and I'm talking back, you know, mid 80s, late 90s. The early 90s, that type of quality in our neighborhoods was being taken away systematically at that time. I agree wholeheartedly with Ms. Marston's statement to say it is apartheid, because you establish a community based upon the amount of people that live in it. So as it was stated, Mr. Bellamy said it, how do you market for drug stores, liquor stores, plasma places, whatever it is to populate this area to make money, and you can't provide food. During this time in Flint, Michigan is a water crisis, a pandemic, and there's no stores. All have closed, shut down, and tore the buildings down and left. So during this time, we started to see floods of trucks come into our local churches to provide food to our community during the pandemic, because we don't have food, we don't have money. And I'm looking at the quality of the food coming on these trucks, and they're coming in droves. Large, beautiful potatoes, large carrots, onions. I mean, everything you would need, and so much that we don't have room for people to actually take them home, because we're giving 5 and 6 boxes out. And then we're saying our local stores why you can't find this quality of potato? Why you can't find this size onion? Why you can't find this type of celery or this type of lettuce? Where is it coming from? Who's controlling that you can provide food in a pandemic for free and you can provide it in a local store for us to buy daily? So I absolutely agree with the terminology, and I also realize the systematic structure that is obvious in our pandemic because we're getting better food now for free than we do to have to buy it.
Thank you so much, Pastor Tillman. And for those who are just attended on the call or have been on the call, please feel free to put your comments in the chat box. Please, we welcome all comments going forward. So please make sure that you do that. Our second question, gentlemen, and we'll start with you, Jamal, on this question, okay? Shows like Ava DuVernay's Queen Sugar accurately portrays how white supremacy shows up in the Black farming community. How can we encourage young Black men to explore more opportunities in agriculture, aka farming?
Trying to unmute my screen. Cool. No, I think perception is important. I think access is important. I think when we think about the things that young Black men are attracted to, that we shouldn't be afraid to explore those same marketing and promotional vehicles used to get our children attracted to everything else. Making it in the classrooms, making it a top priority in all of our conversations, and sometimes showing maybe, meeting young people where they're at, showing them the glitz and glam of being in agriculture business, of being able to grow the food and having, just like on Queen Sugar. Yeah, it's a lot of work. And I think we have to be intentional about the programming that we do when we are really teaching young kids and Black men about their future and the opportunities that they have in front of them. I think it's our responsibility to put these opportunities in front of them as well. They're not as popular. They do seem like a hard work, but I think we need to show the importance of it. And I am pushing now to be a big advocate of what we're teaching children in elementary school about goals and careers. I think we have to be intentional about, again, highlighting the aspects of agriculture, highlighting what all it takes for individuals to be involved. I am just a big fan of, like, kids do not understand, young people do not understand the opportunities that are out there if we're not putting them out there in front of them and competing with social media and everything else that they're putting in front of our kids. I think that has to be one of our main priorities, is just getting them introduced and almost, the concept of building brand awareness, building awareness around these industries that our young Black folks don't have, taking them on field trips there just to discuss it, introducing them to Black farmers, having these panels just about Black farming, period. Maybe showing books and receipts and records of the profits that are able to make, the impact that's able to have on agriculture, and particularly adding agriculture, making that just a part of the curriculum when we are discussing and talking to young people, whether it's talking to about restorative justice, agriculture in their own neighborhoods, things of that matter, because it is important that Black people get their hands in that piece. Because I think as we moving as a country on a whole, discussing, only buying Black and shopping with Black people, we find ourselves that, shouts out to the privilege shirt, man. we find it that we want to buy a lot of things from Black people, but we don't have a lot of your everyday needs, or we're not producing a lot of your everyday needs to keep that money streamlined into our neighborhoods like we want to. I think it's just the entire spectrum of agriculture that we can do better at promoting it. Promotion is my thing, unapologetically. So I speak a lot about promotion and perception and creating that need and using a push marketing effort rather than pull, and having to really put this in the hands of young people. So that's my statement.
Okay, gentlemen, just so we're clear, we have a couple of questions. So I want to make sure we hit all our questions. So Cristobal, you're up next. I want to hear your take, being that you're in Puerto Rico. Can you keep it to like 2 minutes so we can keep the conversation going?
Sure, I will try. Well, answering how we can promote Black men opportunities in farming, the emphasis is mentoring and education, just to give them the opportunity of experiencing since the young years. whoever's interested right now, let's find him a mentor and just show him the way so that he can understand what's happening. I understand that this generation right now are enjoying to the fullest their goals. There's a lot of our community members that they do want to explore, not just to be an architect or an engineer, but maybe enjoy a space on what agriculture offers them. Maybe because they want to refine their product and maybe design a restaurant afterwards. But if we educate them and show them the value that every profession has, they will explore for it and they will dare to do their task. So far here, and why do I answer that way? I've been an outing leader for so many times. Every youth that we have impacted them, they're doing something different, whatever they are in the world right now. So, and they're focusing on their dreams based on what they truly enjoy and not what usually society as an overall told them that it should be how it's defined success. So let's cherish what we have. Let's show them our flavors and let's make sure that they could add up a little bit of their seasoning so that they make our community stronger. So my answer again is mentoring and education.
Dr. Bellamy, you hit some great points in our first question. I'd like to hear your take on Black men, especially Black young men in agriculture and farming.
Well, I have a really good friend of mine who is a farmer. He grows cotton, and he's an entrepreneur in that regard. I think that collectively, if we're talking about Black men and brothers, we have to get to a point in which we're not downing professions. So I can't remember exactly which one of the panelists said it earlier. Stokely was being a revolutionary in my arm, so I missed some of it. But in any event, I think that when we talk about these professions, we often talk about engineering. We talk about owning your own business. We talk about being a basketball player or being a lawyer or a doctor or so forth. But we've gotten away, in my opinion, as a collective, we've gotten away from understanding that there is value in us growing our own, loving our own, and feeding and providing our own through agriculture. I'm a department chairman at an agricultural school, a school that, was originally an agricultural school, and it is rather disheartening to see the lack of interest from so many of our students from going into that field. However, I do think that with the advent of social media, if we were to collectively be able to say and show the value of such, we would be able to see a reverse in the trend. That isn't to say that there aren't any young folk, or for that matter, who are engaged or do understand the value of agriculture and growing our own food. I just think that, again, collectively, we have to show and say that it's cool and it is something that's valued and needed.
Thank you so much. We're going to transition to our third
Bailey, we have one question that one of our attendees asked. The question is, how can mainstream environmental NGOs who have previously turned blind eyes on environmental justice issues, yes, speak, Helen, how can they be a tool in increasing food equity? So I'll say it again, how can mainstream environmental NGOs be a tool in increasing food equity? If anyone wants to address that question before we go into question 3 from the audience. Thank you.
I think there's an opportunity for us to, so that speaks to a larger question, if I may, and I'm going to try to be very brief and be as succinct as possible. In this new era, quote unquote, that we have right now, everybody saying Black Lives Matter as if it's something new, and you have many of these new businesses, NGOs, and so forth looking to show ways in which they're being supportive. It's okay for us to have different lanes. So, for example, you have a group like Black Millennials for Flint, We Act, EJLF, and so forth. It's okay for them to kind of, quote unquote, own the environmental justice lane, and we send people directly to you all to be able to support financially. We're not talking about with sending interns. We're not talking about doing any of the other stuff, because that stuff is cool. But we want to have these organizations, these NGOs, these businesses, and so forth support financially the groups who are on the ground doing so. There are a multitude of people and organizations doing a lot of different work, and that's okay. We need everyone to do their own work to develop like Voltron, come together like Voltron to attack white supremacy. But we have folks in this lane, like the individuals on this call. So let's send and direct those organizations to you all so that the work can continue and multiply. So when we all get together, again, we give more than just a finger or a blow to white supremacy. We knock it on its butt and we defeat it for good.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bellamy. Again, everyone that's on the call, questions are being placed in the chat box. Please do, and we will try to get to your questions as we move through the program. Our third question, this question is going to be posed for Pastor Tillman. Pastor Tillman, high temperatures, water scarcity, extreme events like droughts and floods, and greater CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere have already begun to impact the staple across crops in the world. As a father, what scares you most about the climate change as it pertains to food access? What are the strategies do you suggest to help amplify the message around the issue in the Black and Latinx community?
What scares me about the climate in which is developing in these particular things that are affecting the quality of food we get is, what is the health of my family? What is the development of my children? When I think about, as going back to what Brandon said earlier about when I go to the grocery store, I'm a component of cooked meals. We was growing up and we started to see that, you know, with certain people in our neighborhood that got bigger than others, whatever, and they turned to be like, we call them man-childs. We was wondering why everybody was getting so much bigger, whatever, because everybody eating McDonald's and Domino's and Coney Island. And we started to figure out, you know, what's causing for these things to happen. Then we started to see our classmates have cancer, and we in 9th grade. And certain things started happening. We started asking, how is this stuff happening? Well, all of a sudden, everybody has now kidney problems. Well, everybody's on kidney machines. So for me, I started thinking about, it's not an age, it's not a progression to sickness. There's something that is actually happening that's getting into our community and into our systems, that's bringing forward the sickness into our bodies, whatever. So for me, my concern is, okay, how do I get access to good food so that in my home, that my children are being fed and getting the nutrients they need to develop? Because in every urban community, the statistics of what you hear is the most likely to be affected by a disease is Black and brown. How do you do the statistics that every time a sickness come out, that Black and brown is at the front of receiving it? So as I start thinking about these particular things happening in the world, I'm also thinking about what we are ingesting to our bodies, be it through food, be it through air. These things are becoming an endearing thing to me, because I'm saying, how do I protect as a father to give the best quality of life to my children? So for me, I think that as we champion that conversation, you know, we start to think about, okay, what we need to do to address that our families not getting quality food. What organizations that needs to be addressed, needs to be called out, needs to be put on the front line of affecting what we're receiving. So for me, I think as a father, our job is to be the priest of the house, to be the protector, be the provider. It's my responsibility to be thinking about those things as I try to provide for my family.
Thank you so much. Jamal, and after Jamal, we're going to pivot to our fourth question, or we may look at see if there's any questions in the chat box. So Jamal, in answering that question, what strategies do you suggest that we use to amplify the message with this issue in the Black community?
Yeah, we talk about it. I think one of my specialties is being able to create unique social experiences around the need and what we want. Being able to bring people together with good food, to really set the atmosphere to kind of discuss those issues that we had. I think one of the pieces wasn't it to ensure, what do we do to ensure that our kids have access to these foods, lead-free foods? Is that correct?
Okay, say that again. I didn't hear the question.
Repeat your question one more time so I can make sure I answer the part that you asked me.
Well, the question is very particular. It's what are the strategies you think we should be using to amplify the message around the issue, and we're talking about the issue again of climate change as it relates to food access in the Black and Latinx community?
You know, again, I am just going to say exposure, and to really talk about it, and to charge Black men, charge the head of the household to make this an actual priority. I think social media campaigns centered around, you know, if I have a garden, to challenge my brother to put his garden, to post your garden on the deal. We have to be very interactive, I think, and creative on how we amplify these messages and bring a sense of importance and relevance. I feel like we know culture is very, trying to think of a word, trendy, so to say. And so I think if we are able to use trends to our advantage and make these things, make these challenges as dope as possible. And so I think the Black Millennials for Flint has a Dad's Care social media challenge that they're doing, just getting people to just post certain things. So I think if we find creative ways to work with organizations, and if that's not our call, and also fund organizations and projects to be able to amplify these types of activities, and having brothers on the phone like ourselves to participate and to use our influence to amplify these messages and these game-changing activities. I think once you get into a challenge with your friends and your brothers about you know, whose garden is the best, making these things internal competitions, I think that's just how it feel like that's just how it is. Again, I'm big on just the advertising and promoting and the marketing and perception vehicles we use to put these messages into a real social society.
Thank you. Brandon, very quickly, you got 2 minutes. Can you answer that question?
Well, so I'm not a dad, so it was a little bit more of a struggle to think about how I think about it from a family aspect, because I actually just responsible for myself, and I think I do a pretty good job with that. But I do think about in the future having one, having a family, and all these issues just make me think about what will be available, or like it makes me think about what communities do I want to live in. Like, you know, do I have to live in a community where I want to be surrounded by people that look like me, but if that community is not served, you know, correctly in that space, you know, so I it was just really, even when I saw the question before this, I was just thinking about it like, wow, I honestly don't think about it because I don't have to. But then when I think about the family that I want to have, as well as my friends that do have families, I actually went to call them and said, you know, what do you think around this area? And they didn't have a real response, you know, and then what they said, they were like, it's something that in terms of the food and finding the right food was something that was really placed more so on their wife. That was something that was like really important to her in terms of like where the food came from. So I think we do need to, as men, think about what that looks like. And I like the suggestion too is around if it's not something that we want to lead work in, but we know organizations are doing that work, to fund those organizations and support those organizations as well. Thank you so much.
For the
Mr. Bailey, Mr. Bailey, can I chime in on that real quick?
Sure, you can.
Real quick, number one, I think both kind of, you know, open the door to this, whatever, so I want to say it. We need to know where we can get it. We need to know where our Black farmers locally, Hispanic farmers in our local areas that we can actually get food from. We go to our city markets, it's all white. So they have a list of particular farmers that they actually work with, but for us, whatever, how do we get it? And then for those who don't have transportation, how can it get to me? So when you start talking about how we can implement ways of, if we need to do some type of Facebook page, Black farmers, local areas, whatever, coming near you, set up days, whatever, we get gleaners coming to our neighborhood, Great Harvest coming to neighborhood, but those things come at whim. And believe it or not, we said this earlier, whatever, when it gets to our churches serving our community, whatever, we get that as it comes, not because we made a connection to them. So for us, we can't control the amount. So many people have stopped sending food because it shows them people don't know what's there. So they stop bringing because they feel we don't need it. So I think we need to know where we can get it. And as it comes, how can it get to us, to those who don't have transportation? Thank you.
It's a great point, Pastor Tillman. We're going to pivot for the sake of time to our fifth question, because I want to make sure that people on this call have a chance, an opportunity to chime in on via the chat box. So gentlemen, with this last question, can you kind of keep it real brief? I know it's a lot to ask for in the question, but make sure it's really brief, because we want to make sure the attendees get a chance to follow up via the chat, okay? Black rapper Killer Mike and many other Black men have supported the movement of Buy Back the Block, meaning to reinvest in Black communities. How can Black and Latino men lead the charge in the Buy Back the Block with a focus on improving food access? So we're going to start at the top and we're going to work our way down. But gentlemen, try to hit the points real quick because I want to get to the Q&A. Brandon, you're up first.
How we can buy back the block. I mean that's about being intentional around first starting with financial literacy and investments. I think that it's such a interesting thing because well, if you watch the Netflix special that Killer Mike actually did, which was really interesting in terms of how he the whole point was creating this Black nation, right? A whole sovereign nation, and having all your imports and exports and ownership. And so I think that's really important for us to take that approach to think about how we're going to systematically come together to buy back property in our communities. And the responsibility that falls on everybody, because I know this is not the topic here, but in 2 days is gentrification, and just thinking about gentrification tied with food justice. I think what's interesting is that as a 32-year-old professional that is doing pretty well, I almost kind of look for gentrified communities to live in, because that's the type of community that I would want to live in. And so thinking about that makes me think about how do we do that collectively, individuals like myself who are looking to start our families and stuff like that. How do we create communities in which we're all in, but it's a bunch of people who look like me in those communities and buying property, and then making sure that we share and disseminate information to everyone else to actually make that happen. But I think that collectively comes from working together as a group, and men getting together and pooling money together. Because some of the stuff that we're talking about, when we're talking about some of this real estate money, some of the real estate money is not legal money, right? When you see some of the money that goes into these big buildings and stuff like that, yes, there's government funding that goes there, right? We need to be aware of those aspects and how there's government funds. And then some of the stuff that some of these big buildings we see being built, not all that money is government funds. It comes from somewhere. I don't know where it comes from, but it comes from somewhere. And so thinking about how we all work together to make those things happen so that we can buy back the community or buy up the block, as well as being aware of where are the communities that we can infiltrate because prices are low, right? And we can get in and buy it, sell it. We can make sure. I think about Warwick Dunn down, I think he's still in Georgia, and how he's bought over 50, 60 homes, and then gifted those to single moms, right? So it's thinking about those innovative and creative ways. Nipsey Hussle, in terms of what he was doing in California as well, in Los Angeles. I mean, looking at all these different best practices and pulling those together.
Okay, very quickly, Jamal, you're up next.
Okay, I was trying to jot down a couple of things. I think one of the things that we can do is to me, it's really the agenda building. It's putting collective resources all together so that we can identify what has to happen. I think people developing developing frameworks that are shareable to different communities and hey, this is what we did to execute this plan right here, X, Y, and Z. I think when we talk about investors, to understand that, to educate our community that investors sometimes are different from the actual idea thinkers. And so I think long term, sometimes you run into problems because investors believe that they know how to run the business, that the person that they put in place to do it. So I think when we're thinking holistically and long term, we have to make sure that like we teach the difference between being an investor and what it's like to invest in an actual product and to believe in the person that you're investing in, like what those boundaries actually look like. I think to a point made earlier about understanding where government funded and resources can actually come from, how we are pulling our small networks and groups together, discussing how we spend frivolous cash and designing ways to put cash into investment properties, also within our neighborhoods that makes sense. I think challenging the organizations that are currently in place, the businesses that are established in our neighborhoods, challenging them to do more as well, challenge them to make sure that there is opportunity for us to do business in there. And I know this is a kind of on the other side point, but I'm all for putting folks out of business who don't believe in cooperative economics inside our neighborhoods or communities as well, either. And so just keeping it very brief and simple, that is, some of the things that I think we can do really to buy back the block, and that perspective of just being more internally intentional about how we function. All of us could put our money together and we're assumed with different perspectives and ideas, but I feel like that is a challenge. And so also educating and teaching other people, how do we collectively work as a unit in order to see some of the things happen in the community that we need, to where our individual goals and group goals are all met at the same time and they become no conflict to one another.
Can I chime in on that very briefly?
Okay, hold on 1 second. For the sake of time, we have to get to the chat box, gentlemen. And I want to say thank you, each and every one of you, for your comments and your leadership in your individual communities. Brandon, thank you so much. Jamal, Cristobal, Pastor Tillman, especially including Dr. Bellamy, thank you so much. But I just want to make sure that people on this call, that we be respectful and give them some time so they can ask questions to you directly. Okay, so we have 3 questions in the chat box already. Let me see what those are. Latricia, can you shoot me that question?
Sure. And Wes, you probably may be able to coalesce like whatever you wanted to add on into one of these questions. So one of the questions that came in, and this is a good one. All the questions are good, but this one is really, why does it seem like women care more about healthy foods than men? Why does it feel like women are still responsible for cooking and shopping in Black and brown families? What does the lack of interest show about division of labor in Black and brown families? Is this connected to sexism? How do we get more men involved in cooking and caring about food, not just cheap food?
So yeah, I do think like a lot of this is tied in my personal opinion. Very briefly, we're doing what Jamal discussed just a second ago about bringing, we developed the equity group. As a group of brothers, we developed an equity group. Everybody puts in X amount of dollars every month, and then we go out and we purchase properties collectively. We house our own folks within those groups, and it's a very simple model. For all the brothers in the group, I can send you all a template of sorts that you could use, and we can even do something ourselves. That also goes to the point in which we often think that we aren't doing something, or sometimes it just takes us to jump out there and do it, or we think about, well, maybe that's for someone else to do. And I think, again, that ties into the food piece, because there are several brothers who care a great deal about what they put into their body, myself being one of them. There are several brothers who enjoy cooking. I won't take that role, and my wife does do a large majority, quote unquote, of the cooking, but that's just because she thinks I can't cook. That doesn't mean that I don't care about what goes on the plate or what we take in or consume. So that's a personal kind of example. But when we can get to a point in which I think, just me personally, we need to get to a point in which we stop thinking about why is it that X, Y, and Z doesn't do, or why do brothers do this, or why don't sisters do that? And we get to a point of where, let me educate you on why this is important. We start to build collectivism amongst each other. And that's where the unity is. I think there's a lot of us who are unified, much more of us than we give ourselves credit for. And if we can take that approach, I think we can then have a philosophical shift to see things a different way.
Real quick, I think we just have to really be mindful about like what we digest from mass media and what mass media really portrays to us. We know social media all have algorithms and things, certain things that just can't get to the people in the numbers that it want. You know, we'll put up a picture of a kid and you'll get 1,000 likes. You put up a picture about a community garden you're doing, it seemed like didn't nobody see it or it didn't reach anybody at all. And so I think we just, to Wes's point, got to be very intentional and understand like the mass media is also against the progress of like Black culture as well. And so we have to feed ourselves and go the extra distance to look for those resources.
Okay, we have a question from Robin. And Cristobal, I want to see if, I want to make sure that you get in this conversation and don't think we're leaving you out. I'm trying to make sure we move through this space here where everybody is vocal and everybody has a chance to speak. What is the practical first step of any person can use in rebuilding the family structure, specifically in minority communities? I want to hear your take on that question.
On mine?
Yes.
Well, it's a really interesting question, but I was thinking about the food scarcity and the climate change, and I think it has a proper answer. So I will start with this small chronological events that happened to us in September 2017. We had 2 major hurricanes. Then in summer of 2019, we turned down a governor. So we were for 14 days protesting until he resigned. Then in January 2020, we started the year with a bang. We had earthquakes on the Southwest who affected our normal day of life. And then we all had, like between January to March, the COVID lockdown and all that. So our family lifestyle changed drastically. And the first thing that we had, or that usually I promote on my family, is to have a weekly sit down and see what we can all do to better our lifestyles. I have 3 stepdaughters. They're all teenagers, and they started with me about 3 years ago. So they were already grown and a lot of interesting comments to work around. And I see that the important thing is what's important for each of us on the house and how we want to approach that and how we want to nourish it to make it stronger. So far, they didn't know much about community activism until they got into our home, and they're participants of it. I do know a lot about girls that I didn't know before, especially growing them up. But it is really important, again, communication. How do you approach, like Jamal was saying, there's a lot of things in social media that you will see because they want you to show, but what do you want them to know? How do you want them to integrate to society, to the community? How do you want them to acknowledge how to establish a different relationship that is stronger? Because of these events, I had a really, but it was just because we could, even though
Cristobal, we got a little glitch in your, it's a little choppy.
Okay, so we can actually go to one more question. And then just for respect of everyone's time, this is such a dope conversation. So this next question, and again, if your questions weren't answered today, we will do a FAQ that we'll send out at the end of the week. So the last question is, I'll kind of collapse these two. So what policies should we be supporting to help food access? And then connecting to this other question is, what can individuals do to support efforts? Like from a consumer perspective.
I'll try to chime in a little bit on that last part of what we can do as a consumer. I want to kind of tie this back to a previous question too about responsibility. The young lady asked a question about the position of why women are doing something more than men. I think if we're going to talk about systemic racism and we're going to talk about, environmental racism like that, we got to also talk about our culture. In our context of Black and Brown, as we start talking about, you know, women's role or responsibility, I think it's an intertwining of two, because most men are not responsible daily to feed their kids because they're not there. We live in a generation right now, if we like it or not, that we are coming from one-parent homes, and more likely the father's not in there. So it is her responsibility daily to make sure that child is fed. It's a responsibility to take care of that child if is sick. So she's thinking about what she's putting into that child. Also, you know, we start talking about roles. You know, she's taking on the role of that man who's not there, particularly do it. So it's an intertwining of that. I think that women are conscious about stuff like that. I think that males aren't health conscious. So we start talking about what we can do. I think we got to take our role as in, I'm responsible to make sure this is happening in my place. So as a consumer, if I'm responsible, I'm cautious about where I'm buying at. And I'm also raising hell about why it's not being provided to my community.
But with all due respect, Pastor, that's not completely accurate. The CDC and several other individuals have put out studies that have shown Black males are the most attentive group of parents and fathers of any other ethnicity. So for us to say in which that we aren't being attentive or we're not present in our family's home is a fallacy. And I think it also leads to some of this negative thinking that we have about ourselves. Again, though that the data just doesn't support that we aren't active in our children's lives. We may not have to live there.
I didn't say active,
but we are active, and we are involved. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I didn't say active or involved. I'm talking about responsible as in who's under your roof. And I don't know what those statistics came from, but I want to ask all the men that's on here from the neighborhood you came from, how many of you had a father that was in your household daily? We're talking responsibility day to day. It's not many. How many of us had a father in the home that lived with you?
So again, it's all about how you're quantifying what you define as active. If an individual has to be in the home with you, then is that the only way in which you define active? I have 4 daughters.
No. Yeah, I understand that.
But if you're saying in the home with you, that's not the only way in which you can decide or determine whether or not someone is active or responsible for you. Because that's we live in 2020. You have FaceTime. You can hit them up every single day. You can go to school. You don't have to be there exactly in the home with the child to be active.
I got you. But her point was about who's providing the food that's feeding the child, and I guess your mindset towards what you put on the table. Your responsibility of being in the child's life, your responsibility to make sure you eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner, that's different responsibilities. That was my point of that.
And can I just chime in on it? I think and I'm a father, I have 31, 29, 27, and 20. You know, I'm a 55-year-old male, and I grew up in a household in New York City in public housing. I had a mother, a father, I had 2 older brothers, and a sister, and I also had the community. But I think as Black men, we need to make sure that we are seen as fathers, no matter where we are, whether we're going to work, whether we're picking up the child, whether we're at the park. Make sure those images are out there so we can continue to, you know, and again, we can debate back and forth, but at the end of the day, we are doing this work. I know we are, because I am a father, you know, but I had a father figure, and everybody may not have had that, but there was somebody in your community that kind of kept you straight before you went off what I call the rails. So this is interesting. And, you know, I'm saying, you know, for those, whether you're a father or not, whether you had one or not, the image of what we are out here, and there's some beautiful men, and you're doing great work out here. And we have to just make sure that that image is portrayed out there so they can see us as we are, as strong Black men.
Brandon literally has a whole organization. He's been featured on BET across the country, across the globe for that matter, the Black Men Can, about not only Black fathers, but brothers as a whole doing what they're supposed to do. And just because I don't cook the eggs doesn't mean that I'm not responsible for them being on the table, nor does that not mean that I make sure that my children eat their eggs, their grits, and their lunch and dinner when they get home as well. So again, I think we have to have a philosophical shift from victim blaming, and there's a multitude of reasons why some brothers may not be in the picture, but there's clear data that shows that there are a lot more of us who are doing what we're supposed to do. But I digress.
I agree with you, Dr. Bellamy. And Brandon, I would definitely like to link up with you, after this call, because that is the framework which I think should be out there, and more across the board. So, Leticia, I want to say, we have, I think, run out of time, but let's everybody just put a thumbs up for, Latricia putting this together. I mean, we talk about us men, but we all came from a woman. And the women need to be elevated just as much. They are the ones that are caretakers that brought us up. We came through that vessel. So, Latricia, I want to say thank you so much for incorporating me, for We Act for Environmental Justice, and getting some strong men here on this call. I want to give that out to you. And gentlemen, you as well. So Brandon, Jamal, Cristobal, Pastor Tillman, and Dr. Bellamy, thank you so much, for your input, your guidance, and your strong work in the communities where you come from.
Thank you, gentlemen, so much. This has been such a dynamic conversation. Great question that just came through. We'll make sure that we put like all of the social media handles and contact info, like email addresses, web addresses, so that folks can still connect with everyone. We know that the work doesn't end with the conversation. It's just the beginning. Thank you all so much. This is such a awesome experience to have a group of men together in the middle of the day. I just want to celebrate all of you all. And we hope to see you all on this Thursday when we have part 2 of the conversation that will be on gentrification. All right. Thanks so much, everyone.
Gentlemen.